Hello, and welcome to Florida Trend Executive Perspective Podcast. I'm David Denor, President and Publisher of Florida Trend. Each month, Amy Keller, our executive editor, and I will sit down with a C-suite Florida executive from across different industry sectors for an in-depth conversation about their role, mission, and vision for the organizations they lead. We look forward to diving into business and personal perspectives with these leaders. Also, a special thank you to our podcast sponsor, Florida Polytechnic University. They are a tremendous business partner and an incredible asset to the state of Florida. We thoroughly appreciate their support of Florida Trend. Today's guest is Dean Saunders. Dean is an 8th-generation Floridian with a diverse career spanning politics, conservation, and real estate. He is the founder, managing director, and senior advisor at Saunders Real Estate, based out of Lakeland. Since 1985, he and his firm have specialized in Florida land conservation and large-scale transactions. A lifelong advocate for land stewardship, he has played a pivotal role in shaping conservation policy and preserving Florida's natural heritage. Dean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So as an 8th-generation Floridian growing up in Central Florida on a citrus farm in Claremont, talk to us a little bit about the time that you were growing up as a young child on a citrus farm.
Yeah. Well, we didn't really grow up on the in any of the groves. We lived in Claremont, in town in Claremont, but I got to work in those groves all around us. But no, I love my time in Claremont. It was so formative for who I was as a kid. I think when I graduated from high school, there were maybe 3,500 people in town. But listen, I can remember getting on my bike and my fishing rod, buddy, and just drive all over town and go fishing anywhere. Walking down to the lake. I mean, who had pools? We didn't need them. I remember when people started getting pools, I'm like, why do they need swimming pools? Just go down the lake, go swimming.
No fear of alligators at that time or anything?
Yeah, no. But, and of course the orange groves were all around us, and I can just remember the aroma of, citrus blossoms. And, I'm convinced that's what heaven's going to smell like. But the rare opportunity now that I get to smell orange blossom, it just a plethora of memories just come flooding back. And unfortunately, that's gone. Groves have been replaced by houses, which is sad to me, but people keep wanting to come to Florida, and unfortunately, we can't seem to grow citrus anymore.
Talk to us a little bit about that next chapter in your life when you decided to go to school at the University of Florida. And if I'm correct, you focused on citrus farming?
I did. My granddaddy was a commercial fisherman. He would buy fish from the other fishermen, and he fished himself, and I always enjoyed that. I wanted to be a Jacques Cousteau, right?
Oh my gosh.
I grew up watching all that stuff. And I had considered maybe going to the Naval Academy. Somehow I thought maybe the marine biology could play into that. Of course, they were interested in oceanography, not marine biology. And I decided that I didn't really want to be a naval officer as my career. So, but I'd grown up, I remember when I was 13 years old, it was Easter break. It was the day before Easter break started, and my dad said, "Oh yeah, you're going to start working tomorrow." Started working 10-hour days.
In the groves?
So in the groves, yeah. And so just grew up in it. Everybody in town was somehow engaged in the industry or impacted by the citrus industry, and I loved it. And so I decided I wanted to pursue that as a career. I figured I'd probably end up in sales more than I would be in management. I always was a bit of a salesperson. And I remember walking around town when I was 8 years old selling pancake supper tickets for my dad. And so I figured I'd probably end up in sales, but I went to the University of Florida, and so my dad, it was either that or Florida Southern, and he suggested to me, he said, well, you know, if you get, sometimes with those smaller schools, you don't have quite as many opportunities as you would at a larger college, and if you decided to change careers or change your major, you'd have more opportunities at Florida. And so I ultimately decided to go to Florida.
And how large was Florida at that time?
I'm guessing it was probably 30,000, maybe,
Okay.
somewhere in there, 30 to 40. I mean, it was still a large university, not the behemoth that it is today, but it was still very large.
So Dean, a lot of people know you from your time in politics. Can you tell us a little bit about your foray? How did you get involved in that arena?
I remember my college roommate at the time came in and he said, you know, Dean, Student Senate qualifying ends tomorrow. He said, you need to go down there and qualify to run for the College of Agriculture Student Senate. I said, I don't want to do that. He said, yeah, you do. So, okay. So I dutifully followed what my roommate said, and I went down and I qualified to run for the Student Senate. And I spent 2 years in the Student Senate. I was president of the UF Student Senate and later became president of my fraternity. I was at Alpha Gamma Rho, which is a social professional fraternity for ag majors. And so that probably just...
That sparked something?
That awakened that. I mean, I've always been a leader, you know. I mean, that's just how God created me. After I graduated from college, I got a call one day from Charles Kennedy, who was the administrative assistant to Lawton Chiles, U.S. Senator Lawton Chiles, and he called me at work, and he said, Dean, I know you probably can't talk, so just listen. He said, Senator's looking for somebody to work agricultural issues for him, and you were recommended to us by the University of Florida. Would you be interested in discussing this with us? I said, yes, sir. So I went down that night and interviewed, and 2 weeks later I was working for Lawton Chiles. And so it was a huge paradigm shift, you know, for me in my life.
Tell us what that was like working for Senator and then Governor Lawton Chiles. Give us a little bit of insight into the backstories of those days.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. While I was there, you know, I got promoted a number of times in different positions, but one of those was because I was in Central Florida, I traveled with him. I would pick him up at the airports. I would do the advance work and follow-up work, and he was quite the character. He was a lot of fun to work with, but you know, he'd love to play practical jokes on you, and you know, it's like I remember telling him one time. I just said, this time he was governor. I said, Governor, that's just unfair for you to just pick on us all the time, because we're taking everything you say seriously, and you're you know, playing a practical joke on us.
Do you recall any of those? Can you share any of them?
I do remember one of those moments when I was picking the senator up, and you know, this is pre cell phones and you know, GPS and all that stuff, right? So now I grew up in Claremont, so Orlando was, I knew Orlando like the back of my hand. Sure. Not so much Tampa. And so the senator, we were going to Q-Zoo in the morning, and he was going to be interviewed. And you know, I'm like, okay, well, shock jockey, okay, right. So I pick him up. He's spending the night at Lou Delaparte's house, State Senator Lou Delaparte. They were good friends. And he says to me, well, shouldn't we go down Dale Mabry? But I had mapped out my route going down 75. So, you know, I kind of dismissed it. And Mr. Kennedy was with us, okay? So, and Charles was very high-strung, should I say. And he had this nervous tick. We're listening to the radio, and we're expecting Senator Lawton Chiles any moment. And when I get off and I'm driving to the radio station, I run back into the interstate. And so it dead ends. So now we're going to be late. And Charles, that his, he's just a twitching, and I'm like, I'm done. I mean, he would fire people if you were 5 minutes late to work. So I'm like, I'm done. I'm cooked. And Senator never said anything about it. And Mr. Kennedy left, and Senator and I was together all day with him in Tampa, and then I took him back because he lived on Anna Maria Island at the time. And so I was driving him back, and he just kind of looked over at me and he says, Dean, did I ever tell you about what my captain in the Army used to tell me about the 7 Ps? No, sir, Senator. What was that? Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. So I said, okay, understood. Yeah. We weren't ever late again. I learned from that, which of course was his point. But it was a way of him humorously kind of saying, yeah, Mike could have done a little better on that one. I got my love of turkey hunting from him. Is he loved to turkey hunt. He would go every day. And I remember when he was governor, and this was when I actually was in the legislature. I remember President Clinton came into town. Big deal. Flew into Tallahassee on Air Force One. We all met him out there. And of course, he was staying at the mansion with the governor. He was his host. And so the next morning, President Clinton's doing his jog and goes to McDonald's. And as a man of the people, he's going to meet the press there. And so, sure enough, but where's his host? He's in the turkey woods. He's not with the President of the United States that he has hosted.
Priorities,
he's
right?
Exactly.
Sounds like a 7 Ps moment there.
Yes. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned the legislature. So talk to us, because you served in the legislature from 92 to 96? Yes. Take us down that path on what made you decide to run.
It just was probably time. Because when Lawton decided to run for governor, I helped him raise the money in the campaign.
Okay.
So I stayed on staff for a couple of years. But sometimes it's just time to move on. You kind of get a sense of those things when it's time to, do something different.
Yep.
So I decided I was going to move back to Lakeland and run for the legislature. So it was the Ross Perot years.
Oh,
I
okay.
won by 5 whopping votes. Had 6 recounts.
5 votes?
5 votes. 5 votes. Yep. We didn't have hanging chads, but we did have recounts. Yeah, 6 of them. In fact, when I went to bed that night, I thought I'd lost, and my phone rang at 3 a.m. in the morning, and it was a local political reporter, and he said, "Dean, what'd you think about the election?" I said, "Oh, Bill, what do you think?" I thought, I lost. I mean, come on, what?
You had no.
And he said, "Oh, you hadn't heard?" I said, "Heard? What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, they double counted the absentee ballots. And when they figured it out, you're now ahead by like 21 votes. But they haven't counted the military absentees yet. They're going to do that tomorrow." So then it just started this whole process of...
So how long did it take to get the official?
10 days.
10
days. Yeah, with 6 recounts. And we had an extraordinary turnout. We had 80% voter turnout, which was 20% higher than we normally would have. And so, when you campaign, you campaign to those people that are likely to vote.
Yeah.
You send all your stuff, you knock on the doors of those people that are likely to vote, not those that aren't going to show up to the polls. And when you poll those who are likely to vote, right? So the Democratic polls and the Republican polls both showed me at about 15 to 14% ahead in the race with a week to go. And but they weren't polling that 20%. So there was a lot of angst. And probably my association with Governor Chiles at the time probably hurt me because he was seen as, I was kind of almost viewed as an incumbent. And it was sort of an anti-incumbent kind of a thing, just because I was so close to him. So I think, but who knows? I was also a Democrat, and the Republicans were, at the time, a conservative Democrat, but the Republicans were making strides and gains in Florida, and that sea change was happening. It just hadn't happened yet. Okay. So that probably, I think people came out and voted for Ross Perot, and then they voted Republicans right down the ticket.
At Florida Polytechnic University, curiosity enlightens us, discovery moves us, and innovation sparks us. We are Florida Poly.
So you got into office. One thing that our listeners and viewers may not know, and I think that is fantastic, is that you started one of the most popular programs in Florida history, and that's Bright Futures. Tell us what happened. How did that idea get sparked?
Yeah, and I always love the stories behind the stories, Amy. Everywhere we went as legislators, after the lottery passed and it was to be used for education, and then we had the budget travails of the 90s because we had a recession, and budgets got cut, and I think in desperation, school districts were tapping into some of that lottery money. So it was being used for education, but there was no central definition of how it was being used, because the money was supposed to be used for educational enhancements. And so the school districts went to them and said, but we best know what educational enhancements in our district will better serve our students. So let us define what enhancement is.
So they were dictating the...
And so, yes, so now there's no central definition, so the public doesn't know, right? The district gets to do it. So it's almost like this secret pot of funds that go to them, and then when the budgets get tight, maybe they dip into some of those funds, which is kind of what was happening. And so I told people, I said, I would go to the grocery store to buy groceries. I'd have to factor in another 30 minutes to my quick trip because I would get stopped. And people always were complaining about the lottery. Oh, it's such a flim-flam. You guys said it was supposed to be for education, and it's really not. Blah, 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 blah. So fast forward, big Florida fan, obviously. And so I was going to go to the Florida-Auburn game. And I pick up a buddy of mine from Americus, Georgia, and we pick up his boss, who is an Auburn grad. And his boss starts telling about his daughter going to Georgia. She was a freshman at the University of Georgia. And I said, wait a minute, man, come on now. We've always viewed you guys, Auburn, with a lot of class. I said, but Georgia, not so much. How in the world, as an Auburn grad, did you let your daughter go to Georgia? And he said, let me tell you about the Hope Scholarship that started in Georgia. And, it was merit-based. If you earned a B, you could get into college. And, you had to maintain the B. You could maintain your tuition if you maintained a B. So I thought, that's it. That's perfect. That's what we should do in Florida. So I got back on Monday, and I called Frank Brogan, who was Commissioner of Education at the time, and I said, Frank, man, I got the answer for the lottery. And he said, oh my gosh, Dean, he said, I've been thinking the same thing. I've already got my staff working on drafting some legislation. He said, why don't you run it for us in the House? I said, okay, I will. And so now it was a little bit taller order, because there are constituencies for programs. And I was changing all of that. This was radical. But we were able to get it done. I was able to convince enough of the leadership in the House to do it. And then my attention turned to the Senate, where Frank Glatvala was my Senate sponsor. And I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, he's got 6 committee references. What in the world? Well, he had, all of his bills had 6 committee references, which meant, parlance for, he's in the doghouse with the Senate president. So I went and convinced Senator Don Sullivan, who's from St. Pete, as you probably know, and he was head of the Senate Education Committee, and I said, Don, we've got to do this, man. I mean, look, everywhere we go, the lottery, and he didn't know much about what I was proposing. And he listened to it, and he listened, and he listened. We talked for probably an hour, and he said, you know what, Dean? I think you're right. This is a good idea. He said, I'll just take Frank's bill, and I'll make it a committee bill. So he did. We got it passed in the Senate, and then it goes to the governor. Lawton hated it. He's always, you know, he was a yeah, exactly. Why?
Yeah.
Right? He was one of those really principled fiscal conservatives, and he just didn't like creating anything that he kind of thought might be an entitlement, and so he was concerned about it. So I picked up on that, and I begged him. I said, Governor, please don't veto this. He didn't veto it, but he also didn't sign it. So he didn't sign it in '86. In '96, because we were doing, that was the authorizing legislation. We didn't fund it until '97. Well, I was no longer in the legislature, but it was interesting, as Providence would have it. I was in Tallahassee the day they signed the bill, and I had called the governor's office and said, hey, listen, I want to come by and see the governor and just say hello, catch up, you know. And, oh, Dean, he's signing the private futures bill today. I said, really? Where? They told me, so I showed up, and I happened to be I had a coat on and tie, and so my legislative buddies all grabbed me and said, you get in this picture with us. And so I said, no. I said, no, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the work that you did. You get in this picture with us. And so I did, and Lawton signed it and handed me the pen.
Now, you've also spent a lot of time in the legislature working on conservation easements. And I can imagine that was just as much of, a challenging issue with different constituencies on both sides. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I had this crazy idea when I was 24 years old. We'd had all these freezes in the 80s that literally Claremont looked like a picture out of a dystopian novel. You know, there were just dead orange trees, gnarly dead orange trees everywhere. All that hundreds of thousands of acres of just rolling green hills dotted with little orange specks, and then these blue lakes was now dead, gnarly orange trees, right? I mean, and after all those freezes. And I remember saying to my wife as I was driving to Claremont one day, I said, this is all going to be houses one day, and I'm going to hate it. I said, I wonder if there's a way we could pay the landowner to not develop his land. So I later bought a book about called Protecting Farmlands, and I was reading about some creative things that they had done in some of the states, the New England states, and some of the, not actually in the states, but in the counties. Some of the counties had adopted purchase of development rights programs. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. Somebody else has, sometimes there's not always new ideas. I love to be able to take credit for all these new ideas, right? But I'm just, you can hear about things and realize they're good ideas. And so I said, this crazy idea I had, other places have done it. So, I'm in the legislature. I got elected in '92. So in '94, I decided, I had this crazy idea. But in 1990, Florida had created the Preservation 2000 program, where they were spending $300 million a year to protect environmentally sensitive land. I said, well, maybe we could buy development rights on some of that, because not every person wants to sell their land. They may want to keep it, right? And then it can stay on the tax rolls, and the state doesn't have to pay to manage it. So maybe there's an opportunity to do this. So I took the area of critical state concern called the Green Swamp Area of State Concern, and said, this will be our pilot project. It's 330,000 acres, so it's a large project, large boundary, and let's see how this works. But doing it, Amy, you were right. I mean, the government people in the environmental community looked at me a little bit like I was a fascist. That's how I felt anyway. And the landowners, even though my background's in agriculture, so they knew I was their friend, but I felt like they thought I was a communist. It's like,
You had distrust on both sides
not
there.
sure about all this, right?
Wow.
And I do remember I got it passed in the House, and then we went to the Senate, and I was testifying before the Senate committee, Natural Resources Committee, and I had the Farm Bureau lobbyist on my right and the Audubon lobbyist on my left, standing up, testifying in favor of this new trial concept. Let's see if this will work. And so, and I, because at the time I really felt like, I said, the landowners and the environmental community have a lot of same goals. They just don't speak the same language. But with that purchase of development rights, the landowners felt like their land rights were being protected, right? The rights in their property, their private property rights were being protected and respected. And but we were also getting stuff in conservation. And most of the landowners I know, a lot of the ag land, they don't want to sell their land. They don't want it to be developed. But they don't want to be told they can't do something, which was kind of the mode of government at the time. And so we were able to get it passed and demonstrate the efficacy of the concept, and they were able to take it statewide.
Before we finish up today, you've dealt with all different types of complex land deals. Talk to us about one or two of your most favorite that you're most proud of.
My mind goes to not necessarily the complexity of the deal, but where I've really tried to help somebody that I know that they have some challenges and they really need to get something done. And I take great satisfaction. And when I've been able to really do that, with the widow that her husband's just died and she really needs to get this property done and sold, and I take great satisfaction in that. And I do remember one of my projects that I worked on with a conservation easement, and we got to the end and we were doing a partnership with NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, branch of U.S. Department of Ag, and they had been out, looked at this place, and it was a farm. It was a sod farm. Well, 3 days before we go to the governor and cabinet to approve the deal with their partnership funding, they call and say, wait a minute, part of this property we can't do because it's a sod farm. I said, well, yeah, we've been out there. You've looked at it. You've seen it. You knew this. Well, yeah, but we can't, as NRCS, we can't do easements on sod farms because they are an offshoot of the old Soil Conservation Service. They're to protect soil, so we don't want the soil to be cut and sold off as part of the sod, right? So I get the mentality. So, and then so the director of the program said to me, he said, Dean, I'll just try to do it with our money directly. He said, well, let's just get this done, approved, and da-da-da. So we did. And we just weren't able to get it done. They never got enough money in the legislature to get it done, and then unfortunately John died, and the new director came in, and so the old commitment wasn't necessarily there to get it done, but it took 11 years. 11 years, and I tell people, I said, I'm like a dog with a bone, So when the legislature funded rural and family lands for the first time, to the great extent that they did, made a huge difference, and I said, by gosh, I'm going to make that promise come true, and we got it done. And so I having a little bit of the ability to get it done and tenacity to get it done, but that's what they wanted to do, and took satisfaction in knowing I was able to get that accomplished for them.
Excellent. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast, and thank you for everything that you've done for the state of Florida as well. It's been a pleasure talking with you and really getting to learn a little bit more about your past, present, and the future of what you see with Florida.
Great. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Every new day is a moment to build something that will change everything. This university was built with intention, engineered with purpose. We are Florida's only public university built entirely for STEM. A university built for today and the future beyond it. Florida Polytechnic University. Different by design.